Hey gamers, today we're going to be covering all the best heroes in each role for all ranks below Diamond. Starting off with the tank category, Orisa is probably one of the strongest heroes in low ranks on just about every single map. Whenever you're playing Orisa, you can easily punish overextending DPS or support players on the enemy team with your javelin and primary fire. Not only that, but if the enemy tank is overextending a little bit, you can simply go behind them, use your little helicopter move, and push them into your team along with your javelin to push them further and very easily finish them off by just body blocking them on the way out. Your main goal as Orisa is just to make sure that you're cycling your defensive cooldowns while playing defensively on the objective. And anytime the enemies overextend or push into you, you need to try and punish them. If you're managing to cycle your defensive cooldowns correctly, you will almost always be very difficult to kill, and most of the time you're going to be the last one alive after all of your teammates are dead. The only time Orisa is really bad is if the enemy team does exactly that, where they just kind of ignore you and they just start to focus your teammates. If that starts to happen, you may want to switch off to a more mobile tank like D.Va so that you can start quickly moving around and saving your teammates from dive or other enemies that are just constantly walking past you as Orisa. The next hero on the list is Roadhog. Once you start getting good at landing hooks with Roadhog, he's pretty much a free pick in lower ranks. Whenever you're playing Roadhog, you can very easily ignore the enemy tank, just kind of walk past them or around them and hook their teammates. Now, this won't really work if they have an Orisa or a D.Va or maybe even a Sigma, as they're going to be able to cancel you from killing them with their defense matrix or their javelin throw. Most of the time as Roadhog, you're really going to want to make sure you're not wasting your heal as well. You really only want to be using your heal if you're about half HP. You don't want to be using it unless your healers aren't actively healing you. So make sure that if you're split from your team and you're taking a ton of damage, you use your heal, but if your teammates are actively healing you and you think you don't need it and you can just walk behind cover, then do that instead of wasting heal. It can be very difficult to play Roadhog against enemy Ana players or enemy Orisa players. So if you're getting dominated by the enemy Ana anti-nade or just the enemy Orisa stopping you from healing all the time, make sure you get a Kiriko on your team, or you can swap off to a different tank. Now for the DPS category, Cassidy is probably one of the strongest DPS in lower ranks. His magnetic grenade combined with a single shot of his primary fire is a free elimination against any support or DPS on the enemy team. Combined with a little bit of support from his teammates or just good positioning, Cassidy can do short flanks to pick off key enemies and then retreat straight back to his team without ever being noticed. One really big tip for Cassidy is making sure that you're learning to play off angles and high grounds. These are going to be where most of your picks are coming from, as you're going to either be able to look straight past the enemy tank and pretty much ignore the enemy tank the entire time, or you're going to be really safe on high grounds and just be able to look above the enemy tank and shoot at all of the squishy heroes behind them. You should really never be trying to shoot the enemy tank unless there's nobody else to shoot. And if you are getting dove a lot and enemies are always up in your face, then it's probably time to swap off Cassidy, as he does need a little bit of space, and if you're not consistently hitting shots on enemies or securing eliminations, then you definitely want to be swapping off. Christmas is right around the corner, and here at GameLeap we have a present for you. You can use code SANTA for 50% off your GameLeap subscription. And not only that, if you sign up during this Christmas season, you will have a chance to win a VOD review from one of our top coaches. We will be picking 10 random GameLeap subscribers, so make sure you sign up today if you want to improve now. Junkrat is the king of low elo DPS. He's extremely easy to get random eliminations with if you just send your primary fire towards the enemy team or a wall nearby. He excels on his defensive side with his trap and can defend entire sides of the map from flanking DPS or dive tanks. Whenever you're playing Junkrat, you want to set up your trap nearby so that you can easily retreat past it and allow enemies to walk into it, getting you a free elimination or saving your life. Make sure you're trying to play around small rooms that you can retreat into and lure enemies into, getting you a lot easier kills because they're going to be in smaller areas and they're going to be a lot easier to hit. You also want to be spamming common choke points that enemies walk through to get to the objective on your defense side. Whenever you're playing attack Junkrat, you can reposition very easily using your mines and set up aggressive traps in the enemy's backline or just on the objective that the enemies are likely to walk into. Oftentimes you can use your mines to even jump over the enemy tank and straight into into the enemy backline on the enemy supports for hopefully a free elimination. But if you're dying constantly in the process of doing this, then you probably should stop doing it. You should really only be diving enemies as Junkrat in very rare scenarios where you can easily get a kill and then get out with your life. And lastly, with Junkrat, make sure that when you're using your ultimate, you actually use the wall climb ability on it so that you can drop it above enemies instead of just running straight at them. Torbjorn is another great hero at low ranks. Making sure that you set up your turret in a spot where it's hard for the enemies to push is going to be key in making Torbjorn work. Make sure that if your enemies are constantly destroying your turret, you're actually thinking about where you're placing it. You want to try and put it on high grounds or in defensive spots where it will only shoot once the enemies push into you or the objective. This makes it so that the enemies have to choose between fighting you and your teammates or the turret, and this is going to give it a much higher survivability and a lot more damage output. Whenever you're playing Torbjorn, you should always be spamming chokes just like Junkrat does with your primary fire, and as the enemies start to push into you or the objective, you start using your overcharge ability to burst them down with both your secondary and primary fires. You should almost always never pull out your hammer for any reason unless it's before or after a fight to repair your turret. Since Torbjorn doesn't have any movement abilities, you should always not push into enemies unless you're confident that you can get out safely. Instead, you should be trying to bait enemies into you and your turret range instead of chasing them, and remember that you are stronger defending than you are attacking. And lastly, for DPS, we have Reaper. Reaper is an amazing choice for any enemy tank player that's doing too well. Reaper has no long range damage, and you absolutely need to be careful whenever you're positioning yourself or you're gonna have a really bad time. The easiest way to pick off enemy DPS and supports as Reaper is to use your teleport above and behind them, or just behind them in general, then try and finish them off before using your Wraith form to get back to your teammates. You want to try and never use your Wraith form just to reload and finish off the enemy supports, or you're almost always going to end up dying. If the enemy tank is your problem, you have to make sure that he's not getting support from both enemy support. If he is, then you'll want to swap targets and try and kill the supports or DPS that aren't immediately getting healed. You could also just keep fighting the enemy tank, charging up your ultimate on them, then using your teleport to get to the supports or DPS, and using it on them if you can't finish off the tank quickly enough. When using Reaper's ult, right before you use it, you can hit your primary fire to get a small burst of damage on an enemy like Kiriko so she doesn't have a chance to use her Suzu to save herself or teammates. Now starting off with the supports, we have Mercy. She is a really all-around great healer for low ranks, and she is nearly impossible to kill if you play really well with her movement. So long as you're always staying moving and bouncing around your teammates, you should have a really easy time staying alive and keeping your teammates alive as well. You need to make sure that whenever you're going for your res ability, that either enemies have used a lot of their big cooldowns or you're trying to play behind cover whenever you're resing unless there's no cover nearby to do it. Then you need to make a choice whether to res or not, and really be careful that you're not dying whenever you're resing. One thing about Mercy is that you always want to try and res as fast as you can so that enemies can't set up for it if they know that you're going to res. So the faster you do it, like right after a teammate dies, if you can do it immediately, most of the time you're not going to get punished for that. And lastly, our next support is Moira. She is an absolute monster in lower ranks. Her 6-second cooldown fade ability can allow her to push into the enemy team and use her damage orb and secondary fire to actually melt the enemy supports that are very unaware. And as soon as she starts getting focused, you can just fade right back into your team and wait for those cooldowns to come right back up so you can fade right back into the enemies. There are countless ways to get value out of Moira, but you have to be careful that whenever you're fading in to deal damage, that the enemies aren't just ignoring you and pushing up and killing your teammates. If you find that your teammates are constantly dying while you're trying to DPS the enemies, you should start playing slightly differently. Throw more heal orbs out and stay with your teammates instead of trying to just get a limbs on your own. You can still damage the enemies from your backline, but your teammates do need healing, and if you're playing with a lower heal support like Lucio or Zen, then you probably don't want to be damaging the enemies that much. And for her ultimate, it's best used from behind her teammates instead of from the enemy's backline so that she can both heal and DPS the enemies instead of simply damaging enemies by just fading into them and then using your ultimate. That is all for today, guys. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Christmas is right around the corner, and here at GameLeap, we have a present for you. You can use code SANTA for 50% off your GameLeap subscription. And not only that, if you sign up during this Christmas season, you will will have a chance to win a VOD review from one of our top coaches. We will be picking 10 random GameLeap subscribers, so make sure you sign up today if you want to improve now.